You there! Do you want to know how to bake? Hi, I'm Salty Kichi, and we're here today to show you how to bake. Yes, it's a long time coming. This is the stream that I've been wanting to do for such a long time. It's time. Hi, hello, it's me, the local virtual baker, Salty Kichi, and we're doing it. Sorry, we are doing it today. Today is the day. Today is the absolute day. The day of when we actually do the thing. Where I actually try and show off my prowess, my energy, my power, my true power level even. I show you it all. I show you everything I know. And you're going to learn what goes in my headspace and why I am also so brain dead. This is the day. This is the day I show you all of I'm actually very, very smart and very, very good at what I do. So, let me just bring down my handy dandy little smartboard here, and we're gonna get right into this. Yes. Are you guys excited? I worked a whole 5 minutes on this thing. You're gonna be so exploded by how cool this is. It is gonna be so awesome. You're gonna love this thing. You're gonna love it. I worked very hard on this. Alright? Alright. There we go. Oh, gotta send it back up. Alright. We have a very busy week this week. You see what's happening the next 2 days? We're baking. And we're baking. And we're baking some more. We're doing a whole lot of baking. So, if we're gonna do a lot of baking, I want to make sure that you're all on point. I want to make sure that you're all ready for this, alright? I know. We've done baking streams in the past, but this stream is different. We're not baking one bread. We're not baking 2 breads. We're baking 10 to 12 kinds of different breads. And we are experimenting and testing each and every single bread recipe I have, just because I think I've done them wrong. And a case in point is today. Today at my job, I made bread. I made really good bread. I would go as far and say I made probably the best bread I've made in quite some time. Here, let me show you. Hold on, wait, I gotta first find it. Alright, here we go. I should have put this on my presentation, but you see, I'm not smart enough for that. Anyways, let me show you about this great majesty of this bread that I have made. Look at this amazing loaf of bread here. Look at this. Look at this thing. Look, take a look at this. Take a look at this. This is milk bread, and this is with the new revisions and ideas of how my bread should be made. But going through this and seeing this beautiful loaf of bread happen in here, it's like, yeah, you know, there might be an issue with what my bread recipes are, because if my bread can look like this, there is no reason why my bread should not look like this. So, what I'm gonna try and do make sure and show all my bread tomorrow is gonna be great. And we're gonna try and experiment and see what's wrong with each and every single one. And we will not end stream unless every single bread is going to be just like this one. So, I am going to make sure that we are all up to speed. We are going to make sure that you're ready to bake tomorrow, and making sure that you know what I'm talking about tomorrow, because I'm gonna just not care about making sure you're up to speed, because I do not care. We need to make sure that I know what I'm doing, and I always know what I'm doing, so I'm just gonna show you what you need to know. Ready? Good. I'm gonna assume the silence is good. Is yes. So better say anything. If you say no, you better say it now. You want to know anything about bread baking? If you do, welcome. You're in the right place. If you don't want to learn about bread baking, why are you here? Anyways, we're gonna just stop stalling and get right into this whole thing. So, first and foremost, we must talk about these things. Okay, there we go. We must talk about this. As you can see here, what do you see? Do you see these things right here in front of us? See this? Hope you do. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. Wait. Hold on, pause. Gotta go grab. Okay. Wait, hold on, something just. BRB. Okay, sorry. Okay. Let's get back into the presentation. Alright, sorry about that. We must talk about this right now. Okay. So, I gotta first really quickly why I just ran. Alright, so, I have realized that, for one thing, my yeast that I was using for baking the other time today, was very, very old. So in that sense, I couldn't really bake the best bread I could. That's why I sent you guys on BRB, because I ordered yeast the other day, so it would come in today, and then I can make bread tomorrow, okay? So yeah. Anyways, let's get to the presentation, yes? Do you see these things in front of us? Do you see these wonderful, delicious looking things that I saw and really quickly did a Google search on? Do you see what these are? Okay, excellent. Forget about that. I do not know how to make these things. Can I make a cake? Yes. Can I make cookies? Also yes. However, I do not know the science behind it. I do not know anything about cakes. I don't know anything about cookies. All I know is how to follow the recipe on the back of a instruction manual or book. So, before anyone brings up questions about baking today, we are not going over cakes, and we are not going over cookies. We will never go over cakes and cookies, because I do not understand cakes and cookies. The only time we will ever go about anything like these things is when we talked about cookies, and that is being shortbread. We might talk about cake, but even at that, we might. We won't always talk about cake, but we might. So yeah. Anyways, now that you got this in mind, right? You got this in mind? You know I'm not going to be able to do these? Good. Okay, so let's get into the nitty and the gritty. We are going to talk about the baking terminology. The terms and things that I say and you on stream, to where you can understand what I mean by every single thing. So this is a vocabulary test, alright? So, first things first, the most important thing as a baker that we need to know. What is this? This is not a trick question, by the way. This is just a simple question. What is on screen? What is that? What is this? Tell me what this is. Please tell me what this is. You're gonna get quizzed on this. Everyone's gonna get tested on this. And you must know this thing right here. If you do not know, I will tell you within the next 10 seconds if no one responds. Alright? So count them. 10 seconds right now. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. I can't count. Anyways, let's just get right onto it. This is not a trick question. This is a bread. We all know what this is. This is a bread. This is a bread. We all need to know that right now. The previous two things were not a bread. This is a bread. Do we all know this? Do we all see this thing right here? This is not bread, but this is a bread. There are a lot of breads out there in the world, alright? You know that, right? There's a lot of other kind of breads in the world. This is just one of the many, many, many amazing kinds of breads we can make. But that is not important really right now. What you need to know is how do we get to this point of making really good breads. Let's talk about kneading. Kneading. You do not... Sorry about this pun. It's really dumb. But you need to knead your bread. It is a absolute requirement. It is not something like, oh, I don't have to knead. To some degree, you are going to knead your bread. It is a undisputable fact that all your breads need some sort of work. Bread is an easy thing to make, but it is also a very hard thing to make because sometimes putting in the effort, such as kneading, is very, very difficult. And you know what? I understand that. However, if you want to make a good bread, you need to make sure its gluten is developed, and that is the whole point of kneading. Kneading is essentially trying to form more gluten strands with your flour. If you cannot knead your bread, you're going to end up making a pancake or something really sad looking, because if your bread has no gluten structure, it's going to turn flat. It's not going to rise, and it's not going to be able to be a wonderful, crusty, lovely bread. It's going to be flat, it's going to be sad, and you're going to be feeling very dumb because you wasted so much time making a bread and it doesn't turn out well. So, kneading is the most important thing with simplistic terminology. Kneading is essentially just us making more gluten. It's something that needs to happen. So, if you need some sort of weird way to remember what kneading is, you need to knead. Is that good enough? I think that should be. Yes. Okay, anyways. Portioning. This one is kind of like, you need to do it, but you don't need to do it. It's not required, because sometimes you don't need to portion your bread. But let's talk about when I make buns. When I make brioche buns, or whatever it may be. When I make buns, I make them all in one batch. Let's say I make my normal batch of brioche, and it's like, oh, this batch of brioche is good. But this one batch will make 6 portions of brioche buns. Portions is essentially just like, portions is just essentially tells you how much, oops, sorry, that's not the wrong slide, whoa. Portioning is essentially like making sure that, hey, this is how much we are going to make. So, if I ever say I'm portioning out bread, I'm just measuring out a specific kind of a specific amount of dough, so it can be consolidated, shaped, which is going to be our next thing, shaping into something that we are going to then bake off and then do from whatever we shall there. Shaping is also very important. So, I do not have an example of it on screen right now, but I will show you an example of it right here. So, do you see this? Oh, whoa, that's big. Hold on, let me fix this. Oh. Alright, so, for shaping, this in some regard, can be seen as very poor shaping. The best way you can tell this is poorly shaped, is because you see how that little thing at the end there, the very big gash on the side, that is poorly shaped. If it was nicely shaped, you would not have that huge gash. Shaping, well, shapes your bread. When you shape bread together, you kind of make it into a specific kind of roll or dough or bread or shape. You shape your bread into a sort of loaf to where it will be looking nice and it will look consistent. If you do not shape your bread, it will literally explode and it will look like trash. Here's a good example of what good shaping is, alright? Good shaping is when you're able to make your bread and it's all one nice, beautiful looking color, and also it's perfectly shaped and you can tell with how there is no gashes on the sides here. But yeah, that's how you can tell that you did a good shaping. I'll give you another example of good shaping. So, remember these buns? Remember these rolls? I have made 58, I believe. You can't see these. The other three. The other were off screen. But with this, you can see, obviously, that there are, well, 28 per pan, which is around 56. So we have 56 buns here all day. And with that, they were all individually shaped into a nice perfect ball. If they were not shaped, they would have been triangles, rectangles, and other sort of polygons that would not be preferable, and actually could probably even impact of how poor or good the quality of the products can be. So, very important to shape your bread. If you don't shape your bread, you're not going to get beautiful, golden brown, shiny breads like this. So, shaping is very, very important, but that is something that is admittedly a little bit more difficult than the ladders. Kneading and portioning are very, very simple. Kneading is just a simple thing of just keep going, keep going, keep going. Portioning is a thing of keep measuring, keep measuring, keep measuring. But shaping is something that comes with time. It is a bit of a skill, and you know what? If you can't shape the first few times, it is alright. Shaping is fairly difficult. It is one of the more difficult things when it comes to baking. It is probably, I would go as far as say it is the second most difficult thing when it comes to baking. So make sure you know how to shape. It is very important. You don't need to know, you need to know how to shape, but that is something that will come in time. Very difficult, very hard, but very important. However, the most important thing when it comes to bread baking is our next thing of terminology, and it is so important. I have made and dedicated this entire slide to these one thing, and it is the most important thing. Proofing. Proofing is essentially letting your bread rest and letting it rise, and the yeast is starting to grow. Proofing is essentially letting your bread relax in its perfectly shaped form, and you're not going to punch it down or anything like that. Proofing is so important. If you look at these same bits of bread that I've made today, these were unproofed. These were underproofed. They were not ready to be baked. And if I were to bake them right now, if I were to bake them in that state, they would become ruined, they would become dense, heavy, and very, very unpleasant to eat. They would be very, very, very unfavorable to eat. Now, this is what happened when I did let them rest. They doubled in size, and I was making sure that they were nicely rested and proofed. Proving and saying proof are essentially just me saying, have they rested long enough to where the yeast will actually be able to flourish and grow and make wonderful breads? Now, there is a good question of like, how can you tell if a bread is perfectly proofed? How can you tell if a bread is underproofed, overproofed, whatever it may be? The way that you can tell is if you can look at the first pan of bread, and if you look at the bottom right one, the bottom one, if you count by 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, you will notice that there is, right? Okay, no. Oh, there's a laser pointer. There is. Okay, cool. You can see, okay, this is actually kind of neat to see. Okay, so you can see this one right here. It has a bit of an indentation. You see this, right? When you bake bread, there is a very, very, very important technique that you need to know, and it is so easy. So, you get your finger, alright? You would out your finger and or your knuckle, depending how big your finger is or how big your knuckle is. Bye dude, I will go to sleep. Alright, go to sleep, Lukey. Good night. I will see you around maybe sometime. Thank you for tuning in. Alright. He's gonna miss out on those on the schoolwork, and if he doesn't, and he comes in tomorrow's stream, he's gonna get tested real bad, and then he's gonna get fired. Anyways, so as you can see, there's a little indentation here, but you can see that is not a permanent indentation. Well, it is, but it isn't. And let me explain. So there is something called the 2/3 technique. This is so important. If you do not check your bread with this technique, you will get sad, dense breads, and you will be disappointed because you waited so long to make an amazing bread, and then you screw it up by doing one thing that you could have done, which is just the 2/3 technique. You get your finger, and you would measure, you want to guesstimate this. Your finger and or your knuckle. You want to poke it very lightly in the center or side bit of your roll or bread or dough that is currently proofing. If you press it and it bounces back immediately with no indentation, it is underproofed. It needs more time to rest, and you should let it go. Now, if you poke it though, and it comes up and springs up back just a little bit, not by too much, just a little bit, it will be perfectly fine it is perfectly ready to get thrown into the oven. It is perfect, it is good, it will be nice and light and airy, and will be the best product of bread you will ever be able to make. Now, however, there is such thing as too much of a good thing. If you let your bread rest for way too long, it will overproof. And how you can tell if you do that is that if you poke your bread and it does not bounce back at all, it will be very, very aired out. The crumb will be it won't be tight. It will be too airy. It will be tunneling, which is just a very large amount of holes in your bread, and it just won't be very pleasant. It won't be very fun to eat. It will just be very, you'll just be having a lot of, what's the word? Air. It's like eating a bag of Lay's potato chips. The potato chips are kind of okay, but then when you realize when you open up that bag of chips and you spend like $5 on that one bag of potato chips, and you realize that 25% of the bag is chips and 75% of it is air, that is essentially the same thing. If you are going to bake a bread, you want 100% bread. You want 100% bread. You do not want 25% bread and 75% air. So you need to proof your bread. It is so important. But what if I like eating air? Then you don't eat bread. I don't know. If you like eating air, well, you just don't eat bread. You want to make a good bread, you don't worry about air in that sense. Now, for people that might be a bit insightful, people might think of, oh, what is the difference between proofing and resting? There are two different reasons. There are two different meanings for these things. So, proofing is when your bread is resting, but what is resting then? Resting is when you have mixed your dough and you're letting your bread rest and rise. When you mix your dough together, it's stressed. The gluten strands are very stressed, and they are not going to be able to mix well together. So the best way to let your bread get more easy to handle with and be able to work with is letting it rest. From letting it rest, you then would shape it, form it, and then let it sit again for its second rest. Usually, The second rest is proofing. Proofing is when you shape your bread and then you let it rest and you have no intention on tinkering it anymore. Tinkering such as shaping really. So that's the only difference. Resting is when you let your bread rest and you're going to continue shaping it and forming it or folding it, whatever it may be. Proofing is when your bread is just about to go into the oven, but you need to let it rest for that period. So that is the difference between proofing and resting. Proofing is resting, proofing is the finishing, resting is preparation to get to proofing. So yeah. Actually, wait, before we get to this next thing, because we're gonna get really complicated right now. So if anyone has any questions, speak now or hold your peace. I'm going to eat some candy meanwhile as you all make a decision. Alright, well, I just ate my one little piece of candy, and I'm going to assume that no one has any questions. So with that, we are going to continue on with today, and we're going to get on with the next slides. I will let you all know about these next slides, is that this is the nitty and the gritty. This is the stuff you would be very advised to learn, but at the same time, these are things that you do not need to learn. These are things where like the recipe already fully implies all this sort of stuff. This is what usually goes in my head. This stuff goes in my head 24/7 whenever I am baking a bread. And I'm thinking about this stuff every single time. So like, one of those things that I'm thinking about is always baker's percentage. Baker's percentage is a very important tool, a part of the kit of a baker. Because this helps you get ingredient percentage. This helps you get something called hydration percentage. And then at the end of the day, it just helps you getting ratios and helps you build a recipe. This stuff is just kind of very important to know if you want to make your own bread recipes, or you like a bread recipe so much that you want to change it up in your own regards. So let's say I want to make a bread recipe and it's like a really good dinner recipe, but I want to make it sweeter. So then you would try to add a little bit more sugar, but at the same time you need to make sure that it's enough sugar to where it's gonna fit your liking, but also not kill the yeast. So it's very important to know baker's percentage, so then you can also fill up the recipe, bulk up yeast and then add more yeast or add little yeast or add more sugar and whatever you would need. This baker's percentage is very important about making recipes. And also, if you want a simple way of baker's percentage, knowing what it is, hydration percentage. Hydration percentage is baker's percentage, except you're just doing it with water. And you know, I'm talking a lot about this percentage, but I haven't told you of how to do this percentage, have I? So, doing this percentage is just kind of, okay, never mind. You're just gonna have to just write down what I say, okay? If you want to know. You don't have to know this, but if you want to know, it is your total amount of flour in your recipe. The total amount of flour in your recipe is gonna go on the bottom of your division equation. On top would be your other ingredient that you're going to use. Very simple example. I'm going to make a simple bread. It is going to be 80 grams of water, and then it's going to be 100 grams of flour. 80 over 100, you divide that, you get 80%. You get 0.8 specifically, but then you turn that into a percentage by multiplying it by 100, and then you would get 80%. And 80 grams of flour, 80 grams of water to 100 grams of flour would be an 80% hydration bread. So yeah, that is your go-to. Now let's say you want to add salt though. So if you want to add salt to your recipe, let's say I add 8 grams of salt to 100 grams of flour. your bread would be then 8% salt. That is a lot of salt for one bread, though, to be honest with you. And if you want to make that a little bit more, usually for like salt, your percentages is gonna be more around 1 to 2%. If you have your salt too high, it's gonna be obviously too salty. So you want to always make sure that your salt percentage is gonna be at a bearable percentage. Now, usually with enriched spreads tend to be at a bit of a lower hydration. I'm also gonna talk about hydration for the next few bits here because this is very important. So, enriched breads tend to be a lot less hydrated. They don't need as much hydration as like an artisan or lean kind of bread. They have other things in the dough that will usually help make it a lot more fluffy and airy. Hydration usually leads to that. It leads to a lot of making your bread nice and crispy, crunchy, and then fluffy and soft on the inside and making it very airy and such. Enriched breads tend to not only use a lot of sugar, butter, fat, whatever it may be to enrich it, but they also tend to use dry yeast or fresh yeast. They don't use something like a biga fermentee, or they don't use something like a sourdough poolish or something like that. I know I just said two big things there: poolish and biga fermentee. You don't really need to know them yet. Maybe I'll do another class about that. But all you need to know is that sourdough works a lot more different than yeast. Sourdough starter is a little bit more different than yeast, not only because it looks different, acts different, and is a little bit more sensitive depending on how you raised your sour starter, but it's also a lot. You also just use a lot more of it in comparison to yeast. I would use so for me, I found that the best ratio for me, if I would use sourdough starter in a recipe, it is 1 to 10. If I use 1 gram of yeast, I use 100 grams of starter. These numbers are not finite, they do not work all the time, but that is something I have found out. Will it work? Does it work? I don't know. But that is something I found out, and I need to start experimenting and using a lot more. But we'll find that out later. So yeah, basically, if you want to know what enriched breads are, by the way, think of your brioches, your challah breads, your milk breads, anything that is, well, rich in flavor. Anything that has butter, anything that has oil, anything that has animal fat, any sort of fat, even eggs. Eggs do enrich your bread. The yolks have a notable amount of fat content. So, like the challah bread has no butter. I don't believe butter is kosher, but they use a lot of egg yolk. I think. I can't remember on top of my head. I think it's challah bread. Either way, egg yolk is used to enrich bread. And you just need to really just think about, enriched breads? Oh, okay, it's gonna have some sort of fat, or it's gonna be very sweet. Because they will also usually have, hand in hand with each other, a little bit of sugar of some sorts. So keep that in mind as well. Now, it gets a little different when we talk about artisan breads, because artisan breads have a bit of a higher hydration method, percentage. And if you want to know what artisan breads are, I don't know. I don't know what I mean by artisan breads. Well, I know what I mean by artisan breads, but it's not like what they are actually called. What I mean by artisan breads, think about your ciabatta breads, think about your baguettes, your Italian breads, your sourdoughs, your country loaves. All of those breads, they don't have sugar. They are usually the bare essential ingredients of simplicity, which is literally just water, salt, flour, and then their leavening agent of choice. The leavening agent could be a biga fermentee, it could be a poolish, it could be a sourdough starter, it could be a lot of things. It could even just be yeast by itself, but Yeah, just a bread that has no fat, really. Wait, do baguettes have sugar? That is true. I will give you that. Baguettes do tend to have sugar. They have, maybe not sugar, but they will tend to have mostly honey in their recipes. Honey is a lot more natural, it's a bit better flavor, it adds a bit more flavor than just sweetness because honey is a lot more complex than just sugar. So, baguettes in that regard are still artisanal. They are not really enriched because although enriched breads do have sugar, enriched breads, when we think about enriched breads, we are more or less thinking about how they have fat in them. So I want to show you these two different things too. As you can see here, the left is a enriched bread or a brioche bread. On the right is a nice, lovely loaf of sourdough. So you can tell there is a significant difference between these two, and that is where I'm going to talk about hydration percentage once more. So, hydration percentage also correlates with crumb. Crumb is essentially how tight the bread is. There's really no way to really explain what crumb is. It's like when you cut a bread in half, and let's say you're looking at a sandwich bread, it's gonna more or less look like this bread right here. It's gonna have very few holes, and it's gonna be a very, very it's gonna be pretty much just one slice of something. It is gonna be a very simple, no holes, no nothing. It's just gonna be just like a plain old piece of bread. That is a tight crumb. As you can see with the right here, there's a lot more holes, like right here, there's some holes here. It's a lot more airy, it's a lot more fluffy, it's a lot more things going on, as you can see. It's not as tight. You could probably, if you cut this loaf in half again and get yourself a slice, you could probably throw things through these holes. The holes are so big. That is a more airy, as I just said, it's just a bit more of an airy crumb. An airy crumb and a tight crumb are very much correlated, not with the yeast content, but with the hydration percentage. So the lower the hydration percentage, the more tight your crumb is gonna be. However, if you go with a lot higher of a hydration percentage, it is gonna be a lot more airy, and you're gonna have a lot more holes in it. So if you ever think about ciabatta bread, sourdough, yeah, they will be very, very airy, especially ciabatta. Ciabatta tends to be at like 80 or 100% hydration. It's insane because that hydration, it's extremely difficult to work with, and it's really hard to work with too. Hydration is, as you go higher of hydration, the way you work with the dough will become a lot more difficult. Which is why enriched breads and like artisanal breads like that are a little bit more dry in percentage are a little bit easier to work with. So yeah, that's why when I have my sourdough recipe, I like it keeping it at like 70% because it's simple, people understand that, and it still makes a good product. Like, as you can see, it's very airy, it's crispy on the outside and then fluffy on the inside, as much as most good sourdoughs should be. So 70% for a high hydration is fairly entry level. It's very simple. The higher hydration you go, the more difficult it's going to be to work with though. So keep that in mind if you ever worry that hard about hydration percentage. Alright. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Anyone have any questions right now? Does anyone want to ask a question? Does anyone want to test their own knowledge? Although I can't offer anything here on YouTube, anyone on Twitch, if you have anything to say, I don't know, I'll gift you a sub maybe. If not, we are going to continue on. You got 30 seconds. Sorry that I have to give such short time frames. I give these time frames so I know that I'm not, so that I know I can just move on, you know? I could just be talking out into the void out there. Like, I know broccoli and maybe Dracudus, I cannot pronounce your name, I'm sorry. It's probably in chat, and also Daniel, whatever, I can't say your name. You might be in chat, but maybe you're away from your keyboard right now, and you just don't want to type, so gotta check. Anyways, it's been 30 seconds. We're moving on. So one of the next most important things about bread baking is temperature. So this coincides with proofing in a sense, to where proofing is very important. Temperature is also very important because you won't necessarily, most often than not, you will not bake an enriched bread the temperatures you will bake a artisan bread at. That bread, as you can see, is a nice, lovely golden brown color. It is very, very nice and colorful, and some might even go as far and say that it's burnt, even though it's not. It is perfectly cooked. But this was cooked at 375 degrees. It's very important for temperature to be exact, and if not exact, they should at least be around the ballpark of where they should be. Like, if your oven is at like 345 and you need to bake at 350, then it's fine. It's not, it could be better if it was at 350 or maybe a little higher, but I digress. Enriched breads, it's very, 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 very important that they go at a lower temperature. I usually would find my range for cooking enriched breads, for me personally, with my oven above all else. Your oven's gonna be a lot more different than my oven. Your oven might be older, it might be newer, and it might be able to control temperature better, or maybe it might control temperature worse. Make sure you somehow are able to check the temperature of your ovens, and it is very important for that, so you can get consistent and good results with your bread. Because temperature is very important. If your bread is too dark, if your oven is too hot, your bread is going to overcook and actually burn. If you make your bread too light, it is not going to look cooked enough, and it will take more time to cook. I even would go as far and say, even though that this brioche is perfectly cooked, if I made it at 350 maybe, it probably would have been fine. 375 is probably pushing it, but going at 350, okay, it probably would have been better. And usually they burn, okay, and usually the thing about enriched breads, most often than not, enriched breads have a lot more sugar content than most lean breads or artisanal breads, so that sugar is going to make the crust of the bread caramelize a lot more quickly, because sugar burns a lot more quickly than flour, so just to keep that in mind. Artisanal breads can withstand a lot higher temperatures. Think about, once more, your sourdoughs, think about your baguettes, and a good one that really would get your mind is pizza. Pizza cooks very, very well and very, very quickly at very high temperatures. You could make a really good Neapolitan style pizza at like 800 degrees Fahrenheit. That's why pizza ovens exist. Pizza ovens are infamously, they are outrageously hot. They can be up to 800 degrees Fahrenheit. They can be extremely hot. Very, very, very hot. But the pizza doughs of that caliber are going to be very, very high hydration. They're not going to be like 100% hydration, but they are going to have very little sugar, so they need to completely rely on the Maillard reactions? I think Maillards. On the carbohydrates of the flour that is in the dough to actually brown. So yeah. Artisanal bread. There it is. Sorry, I need a drink. Talking a lot. Not used to talking this much. And this is also another small thing that I want to bring up because it is fairly important. I do think that you need to know this, and it's just a silly term. Oven spring. What is oven spring? It's kind of silly to explain this because it's like, yeah, duh. That's what. It's kind of like, oh yeah, duh. It's like how it works, how it is. But oven spring is essentially how much a bread rises. If the bread rises, that is oven spring. And this does actually coincide specifically with most artisan breads. And this is why also temperature is very important for this, and also why it's on the same slide. Artisanal breads bake a lot better at higher temperatures, and they tend to have a lot more oven spring at higher temperatures as well. If you were to bake a sourdough at 375, it would still cook, and it would take longer to cook. However, the rise that it would get and achieve would be very, very, very low. It wouldn't be that grand. Can you say hi? Sure. Hi, Paige? I guess. Hi? Sure. Hi. Anyways, artisanal breads tend to be very, very, I just lost my train of thought now. Artisanal breads just tend to flourish a lot more in temperatures to where it's higher. The reason why they have more oven spring and why they rise better in higher temperatures is due to steam. Steam is there's a few leaveners in the world, like there's chemical leaveners, there's natural leaveners, and then there's steam. There's steam. Those are usually the three most commonly known leaveners. With bread baking, we use a lot of natural stuff. We use yeast, we use fresh yeast, we use sourdough starters. The other thing you could use is steam. Steam doesn't make that much of a contribution when we talk about bread rising, but this is usually that one thing. Usually. Now, I also don't honestly know the true science behind it, but that is pretty much the very, very quick run-through of artisanal breads being able to rise in the oven a lot more at higher temperatures. Higher temperatures, more steam, more rapid movement, and it can bounce up a lot more quickly. There you go. Okay, so now we're getting into the very, very small bits of this stuff. This stuff is very just small, minute things that you don't really need to know at all. Like, the other stuff you don't really need to know at all. But this stuff you really, really, really do not need to know. Because it's so situational that it's like, it's good to know, but you don't need to know. So, there is a such thing as I mentioned, fresh yeast. There's dry, instant yeast that I commonly use, and then there's fresh yeast. Fresh versus dry, there isn't really too much of a difference. Dry yeast is something that you need to usually activate. Like, when you usually get yeast, you usually throw in water and then you let it foam up and then you use it as that. Fresh yeast, you don't need to do that. Fresh yeast, you just pick a chunk out and throw it into your water and start baking and doing all that such. It is very, very convenient. However, it is perishable. It has a very, very short shelf life in comparison to dry yeast. Dry yeast can last up to like 4 to 6 months when stored correctly. Fresh yeast can probably last like a week in the refrigerator. If you freeze it, it lasts longer. But at the same time, if you freeze your yeast, you might as well just use dry yeast. It's kind of that same concept. And usually dry yeast, fresh yeast, you have to use usually double what you would for dry yeast. So you have to use like 7 grams of dry yeast, you're gonna have to use 14 grams of fresh yeast. It's like a lot of things with like fresh versus dry. Usually when you cook with like dry herbs, you need to use a lot less. when you usually cook with fresh herbs, you want to use a lot. That is because dried herbs tend to be a lot more condensed, and they have a lot more strength and flavor. It's kind of the same idea with dry yeast. Dry yeast is a lot more condensed and has a lot more potential to grow in comparison to fresh yeast. So, that relaxes bread. This is kind of going back to what I was talking about in rich breads. Enriched breads have fat. Fat relaxes bread. So when fat relaxes a bread, it makes it a lot more fluffy and soft. It's like, yeah, that's it. There is one thing that to know about this though, that about fat relaxing bread, and that is that adding fat to a bread should be added near the end of your kneading. That is because when you knead your bread, if you add your butter right away, it is going to make it very, very difficult for your bread to be, well, mixed together. Bread, butter, oil, fat, any of that such makes it so that gluten is a lot more difficult to make and to develop. So you want to add you want to add fat nearing the end of your mixing. So let's say you mix your bread for like 2 minutes and it's like all this nice kind of homogeneous mess, but it's still kind of tacky. That is the best time to add your butter. So yeah. Sugar should be used sparingly. Sugar okay. Sugar is like salt. Sugar is salt in a sense. If you're in the ballpark that thinking that sugar helps yeast grow in very small quantities, yeah, it can help your thing grow. But I can't remember the word for it, but sugar does the same exact thing in water that salt does. It absorbs a lot of liquid and tries to occupy as much water as possible. When it does that, yeast is also trying to compete with that. However, the thing about why yeast can't eat all the sugar, for example, is that the sugar is extremely condensed. It is not like flour, because flour is a carbohydrate and a carbohydrate is a sugar. Sugar is pure sugar. Think of it as if I gave you a bottle of beer. You'll be like, this is grand. I love myself a nice good old bottle, cold one of beer, and it's like, hey, it's grand, it's fine. But if I gave you pure ethanol and you had to drink the same amount of ethanol to beer, you would be so blasted out of your mind that you would probably puke. It is the same regards with sugar. A little bit of sugar is fine, but it does not need that much sugar. It will kill the yeast. So be very sparing with your sugar. And now this is very important. This goes back to just the first slide, one of the first slides of this presentation. I need you to all answer me this very important question. What is this? What is this? What is this thing? This is not a trick question again. This is review. You thought that this was gonna be, there's not gonna be any tests. You've been wrong, you've been lied to, and I'm sorry. But there is one question. One question. There's just one. Answer it. What is it? Juan, you win. This is still bread. Congratulations. You are the smartest person in the class. Let's give it to Juan. Congratulations, you're the smartest boy! Sorry, teacher, I slept through that part. Well, you know what? You could have not said that, and that would have been fine, because you still got that question right. You got the question right. Congratulations. Good. Alright, so, this is the most important baking advice I'm going to give you, alright? From the entirety of this stream, I have been giving you all very, very, very important baking skills. This is going to be the most important one. This is my legal discretion in some sense, I guess you could say. As I will go out on saying, I am not a registered baker and I've never worked in a bakery in my life. I have no idea about how technique works. have very poor technique in some sense, and I am not that good at baking professionally. Despite that, I know. I baked like 56 rolls today, okay? I bake bread pretty much every single day, okay? But I have never worked in an industrial I have not worked in a commercial setting before. I have not worked as hard as a real baker would because I have not worked in a actual bakery yet. So yeah, I have not worked in an actual bakery. This is your only discretion in the entirety of my life of streaming, that I am not a registered baker. I have never worked in a bakery in my life, and everything I have learned is from pure experience, reading books, and getting critique from other people who are a lot more qualified as a baker than me. This is your one time, this is your one offer. I'm not a baker, but I consider myself a good home baker. That all said and done out of the way, illegal baker, I have been deceived. I mean, I've told you all. I've said this plenty of times. I'm not a real baker. I am a baker, but I could be a better baker, you know? But yeah, there you go. I am not a registered baker. I will try my best still, and I want to make the best bread I can, because if someone like me, alright? If someone like me can make beautiful, beautiful breads that look at these things. Look how amazing and like creamy and like shiny these breads look. We're going to sell these. We're selling these breads at my job. That's how good they look. If someone as much as a nobody in that sense of bakeries and baking in my life, as someone like me can bake such beautiful breads that they are eligible to be sold, you know what? You can too. Alright? So yeah. Thank you all for coming to my stream today. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. Don't want to exit. No, okay. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching my TED Talk about Baking 101. I hope you were able to watch and learn something. Yeah, that's the end of the baking of the thing. Now, I will let you all know on the one quick thing, and this is very, very, well, not one quick thing, but I will let you all know about what's going to happen tomorrow, because maybe you're not aware, maybe you lived under a rock, and you know what? Maybe you weren't paying attention to me at all of what is happening with the next 2 days. Well, my good friends, the reason why I wanted to tell you all this baking stuff is because tomorrow and the next day, we are going to be baking 2 days back to back. We are going to be baking Friday, we are going to be baking Saturday, and although I have not put it on the schedule, if I have to bake Sunday, we will bake Sunday. We are going to be making 12 breads, maybe even more throughout these days. So we're going to be back to back, baking back to back every single, not every single, within these next 2 days. We are going to be baking bread. We are going to be testing recipes. We are going to be baking and baking and baking and baking, and we are going to go through every single recipe with true and finite detail. And that is why I wanted to show you everything with the bread baking today. You needed to know all these specific things, so when I say something silly tomorrow and you have no idea what I said, I can now look at you all and say, why did you not show up to yesterday's stream? That is literally why I streamed yesterday. I wanted to stream yesterday so you all get the idea. You needed to know. You needed to learn. And that is why I have given you all this TED Talk today. So yeah. Well, I'm gonna get rid of that board now. And, well, that's it for today, really. I didn't really have any more plans today. Yeah, that's it. No more streaming today. We're pretty much done. I wanted just to show you all a bit of my bread knowledge and what I have accumulated as a silly little bread guy online, and also just with my own experience of just baking. So yeah, we're gonna be baking a lot these next 2 days, and I wanted to make sure that you're all prepared as much as I am. So when we start baking tomorrow, you know what I'm talking about, and if you tell me to explain what something is, I am just gonna tell you, skill issue. You can check it out tomorrow. I mean, check it out on my stream today. So yeah, I will make clips of today so you can even have an easier time knowing what I'm talking about. So yeah, that's it for today's stream. Thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you. I hope this stream was very educational and was helping you become a better baker by every single second you watched. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm gonna get ready for tomorrow. I gotta make sure my yeast is all ready to go. And maybe come back and we'll probably do some more bread baking. Maybe. So yeah. If you want to see more of the action, see it tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow is when we will actually do the actual baking. I will see you around. Otsukichi and ciao.